All right, everybody. Thank you once again for tuning in to Walks of Life. And as I mentioned, today I'll be talking with an atheist. And that atheist today is Jasmine. How you doing, Jasmine?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's dig right into this.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Jasmine. I grew up in a small town in South Alabama. I moved to Atlanta after college. I love to travel. I love to read. I'm married with a dog. We had two dogs. We recently went from two to one, so that's still hard to say. But we had a 17 and a half year old that just passed away. So now we have, my husband and I are, we say puppies and passport stamps, so we're not having human kids. So we love to travel, and I work in the aesthetic market. So I cover half the state of Georgia. I have a really fun and challenging job. And contrary to what I thought when I was a little girl, I don't go to orgies and like drink blood or eat babies on the weekends. I'm just your like neighborhood atheist whose life looks exactly like most of my Christian friends, except maybe we're somewhere different on Sunday morning. I'm sleeping in while they're at church.
Okay, so you do have Christian friends.
Most of my friends are religious in some way. Mostly Christian, I think, just from being in the South, but also my husband's Jewish. We have some Jewish friends, but definitely more theists than atheists in my life.
Now, you and your Christian friends, do y'all ever back and forth debate?
Yeah, we definitely talk about it. There have been a lot of like, we have a fire pit in our backyards. There've been a lot of nights with friends. A lot of times out of curiosity, they're like, well, what about this? Or what changed your mind? Because I used to be a believer. So there's a lot. Yeah, we have tons of conversations about it. I mean, just like everything else.
I caught something in that. You used to be a believer.
Yes, I did.
So at one time, you did believe in God.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home. I grew up in a small town in Alabama, like I said, so I never even met an atheist until I was in college. Never met a Jewish person until I was in college, or a Catholic person. So I was in a town where really everyone was mostly Southern Baptist, a couple Methodist, a couple Presbyterian, but Protestant. And at that time, atheist seemed like a bad word. It had a very negative connotation, like a scary person. So yeah, I was a theist until towards the end of college is when I started moving away from the belief, and then it took me a few years to say the word atheist. I think because of the stigma put around it the whole time I was growing up, that I softened it by saying I'm not sure if I believe, or finally I don't believe, I'm agnostic. So it took a while, and that's actually one of the reasons I'm excited to talk to you, because I feel like there are a lot of those friendly neighborhood atheists that we don't wear a cross necklace, right? So if someone's a Christian, they have a cross on their necklace. If someone's Jewish, you might see a Star of David. We have no symbol. And so I think sometimes what people see is like a militant atheist that's maybe a little harsh sometimes. Like they think, oh, that's what an atheist looks like. When if you just interact with me on a moderate level, you probably have no idea. And I'm just like this really nice person who maybe you've seen be kind to people, and would be surprised to find out that I'm also an atheist. And I think that over the years I've decided like maybe we need to come out more so that people see that we're just like everyone else.
Was there one determining thing that made you just, I'm full-fledged atheist now?
It was definitely a process. So I grew up really involved in the church, going 3 times a week to church. Even when I went away to college, I went to church on my own. Like it wasn't like my parents were dragging me there. I still went to church at the university. It was a slow transition. So first, I started in a class. We talked about like comparative religion. We talked about other more ancient religions, ancient even, for instance, the Epic of Gilgamesh, right? So the story in the Epic of Gilgamesh predates the time of when Noah's Ark was supposed to happen. And it was a very similar story The gods were mad. There was a flood. They killed everyone with Gilgamesh. And I was like, it's interesting that these mythologies that predate Christianity are so similar. And you start to think, is this just what the human mind comes up with when they kind of can't figure out how something happened? And are these legends and mythologies kind of borrowing from each other? So that kind of made me think. And another thing that happened is I think it was really easy when I had never met a Jewish person, for instance, to believe that all Jews were going to hell, right? So as a Christian, I was taught like the only way you go to heaven is through Jesus.
Right.
You have to believe he's the Savior. And it definitely wasn't an anti-Semitic or like we hate Jewish people. It was more like we love them, bless their hearts. We got to tell them about Jesus. And like, it was from a place that was supposed to be of love. But it's a lot easier to believe that all Jewish people are going to hell when you've never met one.
Right.
And then you start to be around people and you're like, do I want to worship a God that these, like for instance, the Holocaust, right? So you're telling me, if we're going by the mythology I've been taught, that all the people in the concentration camps were worshiping the right God. They just missed the Jesus part, right? So like we're pretty close. And they went through this hell on earth, and now they're tortured for all eternity because they didn't believe in Jesus. So that was a big part when I started having more empathy and thinking, how can I stay in a place where I believe everyone that's not like me, whether they're like from a distant place where they're, a primitive place where they may have never heard of this, or maybe they're Jewish, or maybe they're just really good people. How can I worship a deity that would do that would send those people to hell? And then a second big shift was the Passover story. So are you pretty familiar with it? Yeah. So, growing up in the church, I know with Christianity it was a little bit more focused on Easter, but the Passover story was always like around that time. Every year we would focus on it at church. And when you're a kid and you've only heard one thing from one perspective your whole life, it's really easy to focus on the liberation of the Jews from Egypt, right? And God setting his people free. And that was all we talked about. But as I became more mature and developed more empathy for other people, I started seeing the other side. And so I thought, okay, so all we talked about was liberation, but we didn't talk about all the people that, if this myth were true, woke up to their dead children. And they didn't vote for the pharaoh. Like, you think a regular, like, poor Egyptian mom has anything to do with the pharaoh's decisions, and she just wakes up to her firstborn child dead. And that's, like, atrocious. I mean, that's evil. And on top of it, the more you read into it, it specifically says in the Bible that the pharaoh was going to let the people free before the last one, and God hardened his heart so he wouldn't. So number one, that took away the Pharaoh's free will. God forced him to say no, and then to punish him for what God just made him do, he murdered all these people's children. And I started to think, not only do I have some logical reasons to think some of this doesn't make sense, but secondly, if the God was less moral than me, because I know I for sure wouldn't murder a bunch of people's children because their king made me mad, how could I ever worship it? It would not be worthy of worship. So I think another thing that I always like to address is that I feel like a lot of people think anyone who's an atheist either hasn't heard about religion, if they're Christians, that they haven't heard about Christianity, or that maybe if they turned away from it, it's because of some trauma, some terrible thing happened, and they gave up on God or turned their back on God. But I actually have an amazing life, which confuses some theists sometimes, that my mom even maybe thinks the devil's doing it to keep me away from God by giving me such a great life, which, all right, cool. But anyway, yeah, I have this amazing life. Things just really seem to go my way. I went from being in a small town, dreaming one day I'd see New York, to traveling the world. I was on an island in Italy, the most beautiful place in the world, and met a man who looks and acts like he came out of a romance novel, and now he's my husband. I have an amazing career. I've never even lost anyone I really love until I recently lost my dog. That was my first big loss of my entire life. So it's not that I'm some bitter, angry person who turned my back on God because things didn't go my way. I actually have a really amazing life.
Family. So your husband, he is an atheist.
Yes, he wasn't when we met, but he is now.
Parents?
Definitely Christians who are fairly certain I'm going to hell.
That was my next thing. How do they feel about
me being an atheist? So the first thing people always ask was, how do they feel about me marrying a Jewish guy? Because I'm from a super southern town. But they think he's the chosen people, so actually they think he might have a better shot than me. So they're cool with that. But for me, they're sad about it. They don't love talking to me about religion. Like, my mom says stuff to lead into a conversation about religion, but then immediately is like, oh crap, and kind of backs out. I think because I'm a dangerous atheist, right? Because I think a lot of people assume, oh, you're an atheist, I bet you just haven't heard this. And I'm like, oh, I heard it. Like, I heard it at church 3 times a week my whole life. I've read a lot of the Bible. I never sat and read it cover to cover like a novel, but I'm a very informed atheist. So I think sometimes my mom will be like, well, what about this? And I'm like, oh, this, and this. And she's like, I don't want to talk about religion. This makes me upset. I'm so sad you're going to hell. Maybe you'll come back.
So family functions, they are uncomfortable sometimes?
No, I mean, my parents love me. They do have this hope. I guess there is a verse in the Bible that says something to the point that, like, raise your children in the way they should be raised and they won't veer. So my mom,
know that.
Yeah, so my mom is like, okay, well, something's going to bring you back. Or sometimes she'll be like, I hope God doesn't bring you to your knees so you'll be forced to come back because something so bad happens to you. So I guess she does hold on to this hope that I will come back to religion. But yeah, like, she for sure thinks if I got in a car accident right now, I would be in hell. Yeah.
Now, you and your husband plan on having kids?
No, we're not having human kids. We love to travel, and we love our marriage and relationship as it is now. So we're just having a lot of fun. So no humans.
So, what do you think the universe came from?
I am in a place that I can't explain it, right? But I'm really comfortable with saying I'm not sure. The Big Bang Theory makes a lot of sense to me, but I'm also not like that. I'm more of a literature person than a science person, so I can't go into deep explanations. But I'm okay with thinking about, I think 100 years ago, how many things that people had no idea how it happened, and now we do. So we're always learning. So it could be something that in 100 years we'll have a much more concrete answer for it. And I also want to say, I think some people equate atheist with believing there is no God, but that you can't prove a negative. Atheist means not a theist, right? So it just means I don't believe in God. So it doesn't mean I know that
there's not a God.
You can't prove a negative, yeah. Yeah, so I can't tell you there's no God. I can just tell you that there's no God I've been given evidence to believe in. Like, you don't believe in, you're a Christian, right?
I'm a very spiritual person. I'll put it that way. I was raised, I come from the South too. I'm originally from Mississippi.
Yeah.
We had to go to church.
Yeah.
We had to, but I tell everybody I got better. Of course, you're being made to go, Mom, you gotta go to church.
Yeah.
But once I was on my own, and people would ask me, like, yes, I believe in God. But when someone asks me, like, hey, are you Christian? Are you this and that? I just tell everybody I'm more spiritual.
More spiritual.
Because I'm a full-fledged believer that there's a God. But I don't judge other religions.
Right.
Like, just because you don't believe what I believe.
Yeah.
I still respect it. And that was one of the reasons. I was like, I wanted to sit down and have a conversation with someone who doesn't believe as much.
Yeah. You don't believe in a lot of gods, right? So So I just believe in one less than you. Like the same reason that you don't believe in Thor or Zeus or a Hindu god. Though it's just you haven't been given evidence to believe in them. I also haven't been given evidence to believe in the Judeo-Christian God. So exactly like I was saying, like there's no, you can't, I can never prove to you that there are no unicorns, right? But if I come to you and tell you that there's a unicorn, I've made an extraordinary claim. I need extraordinary evidence. It's not up to you to prove to me that they don't exist. It's up to me to prove that they do. So I think growing up, I was very indoctrinated. Like, of course I believed in God. Everyone around me believed in God. It was all that I saw, and I was told by the people I loved and trusted. So it took until I was an adult and looked at things from different ways. But yeah, I would never have the arrogance to say there is no God or no higher power that is what we are human. I think for me, if there is some kind of creator or higher power that is so far above us, for me to try to understand it would probably be like trying to teach my dog calculus. Like the fact that we put it into such human terms. We even call God he, right? Like, does he have a big God sky penis? Like, we give him all of our traits. We give him our pronouns. We give him anger, wrath, vengeance. We tailor him to our times, right? We tailor him to our own morality. So there was a time that slavery was discussed in the Bible as actually here, not oh, we shouldn't do slavery. Here are the rules for how to treat your slaves. Not that we shouldn't rape women, but if you rape her, marry her, right? And now as our morality has changed, our God has changed. Like people start to focus, thank goodness, on kind of the kinder aspects, especially with Jesus. It's funny with a Jewish husband, they got just the Old Testament, right? So that God was like harsh. So I always say he was like good cop, bad cop. Like the Old Testament God was killing the children, doing, making a flood to wipe out the earth. Like he was pretty hardcore. And then Jesus is like, sorry about my dad, everybody calm down, like turn the other cheek. And it was a very big shift. And what's interesting is that in Judaism, there's no Jesus, right? Jesus was a prophet, not the Messiah. So they don't follow the New Testament. So then you think, well, why did you change so much? In the Old Testament, if you see your neighbor gathering sticks on the Sabbath when he's not supposed to work, what's your direction? Stone him to death, right? Literally, stone him to death. Well, why does my Jewish husband's grandmother, who's very religious, not stone people to death when she sees them gathering sticks? Jesus didn't have to come tell them to stop. As humanity has evolved and our morality has evolved, I think that human goodness overcame religion. So they didn't need a Messiah to tell them to stop stoning each other. They stopped because I believe that people are good. Whereas my mom believes we're born evil because of Eve eating the apple, and we can only become good through God, right? Like it's like we're sinners from the beginning. And that was also a really tough message. I feel, and I know some people come to religion and find that it brings something to their life. Maybe it brings comfort and peace. But I feel that shrugging religion just freed me in so many ways because I always grew up like, you're a sinner, you can never deserve what Jesus did for you. He died for your sins, and no matter how much you try, you can never be good enough because you're a flawed sinner. And I would think like, okay, well here I am in college, I don't drink, I don't have sex, I don't curse, I don't smoke, I try really hard. But if I was a really good Christian, instead of talking to my friend about a movie, I should have invited her to church. Like I could never be good enough. And there was a real theme of unworthiness. And I still see it. Like I have friends from high school that will say like, I'm blessed beyond what I deserve. Like I'm unworthy of this. And that was a hard message for me because I'm kind of an overachiever. So to tell me I can never be good enough to deserve what Jesus did for me. And he did it because he loved me, but I have to try really good. It's really hard to be good. That was a hard message, and shrugging that and being able to see myself instead of as a flawed sinner, to see the beauty in humans. Like I think people are magical and good, and there are way more good people than bad in the world. Absent of religion.
Gotcha. So your Christian friends, do you ever go to church with them?
No.
Would you go?
I mean, listen, I've been to church a lot in my life. I do go to church when there's a wedding in a church or when there's some pretty art in a church in Italy. I mean, most of the time now if I'm in a church, it's probably in Italy because there's like a painting in there. But I do go with my mom and dad on like Mother's Day and Father's Day here or there. Like if they're in Alabama, so if I happen to be visiting them, I go with them to church. So at this point, I couldn't see a reason that I would just like go on a Sunday morning to church with a
So when
friend.
you go on those instances, small town, maybe people in the church know a few funny looks when you walk in.
So I don't know if people at my dad's church know an atheist, but we actually did have an interesting situation the last time we went for Father's Day. So, like you said, small town, right? So what's the assumption? Everyone in my town
Knows
either
everybody, everybody's business.
yeah, and everyone in town either is a Christian and very active in their church and their faith, or feels like a backslid Christian, right? So like there might be someone that's like, I haven't been in a while, I need to get better about this, like that. But I can be certain that there were no other atheists in the crowd. But my brother-in-law happened to be visiting from Israel, and my husband and I had been with my dad for the couple years before, and both of those years it was a very light message. Be a good dad, love your children like God loves us, kind of like, all right, nice message. Then we go get lunch, everything's cool. So my brother-in-law was in town, and as a Jewish person, he was like, I don't know if it's like weird for me to go to church, like I don't know if it's against my own beliefs, like, and so my husband kind of told him like, oh, no, it's not a big deal, it's nice, and it was also interesting for my husband to see the difference because the church was a lot more relaxed and more personal, whereas in Judaism there are a lot of like rituals and you read certain prayers certain days. So my husband's like, actually it's kind of a cool experience. So we go, and to the preacher's defense, who would ever assume that there might be two Jewish men and an atheist in the crowd this day. And so he starts talking about how, you can only be a good father if you believe in Jesus and if you show your children the way to Jesus, and otherwise they're going to hell. And so it was a really awkward because my brother-in-law, who loves his father very much, is like, you just basically told me that I don't have a good dad, because even though he believes in God, your same God, and he did teach me about God, he didn't teach me about Jesus, and you're also reminding me that you believe I'm going to hell. And so it's actually a pretty awkward situation.
I bet it was.
Yeah.
All right, I'll take you out on this.
All right.
Let's just say for the sake of this conversation. Let's say God, of course I believe. Let's say we get to the end. He's real.
And which God? We're talking Judeo-Christian?
Yeah.
Okay.
We get to the end. I hope this coming no time soon.
Right.
We just saying for the conversation. We die. You have to answer to him. And he says, you didn't believe me. I sent you to hell. Are you comfortable with that?
It's super dramatic, right? I mean, I feel like the one that should be doing the answering is him. So if we're talking the Judeo-Christian God, and you are completely omnipotent and omniscient, and you made the decisions that I read in the Bible to create people only to then get mad at them for doing what was in your plan, or actually completely taking away their free will, which you promised them they had, so then you could go murder a bunch of children and cause pain. The truth is that the Judeo-Christian God is not worthy of my worship. So even if that God was real, how could I pretend to respect or worship someone who I find goes against my own morality? And I also, it's exactly the same as me saying to you, like, what if Thor was real? I mean, what if anybody else was real? And I think that I also always like to bring up, like, do you believe God is completely all-powerful?
Yes.
Do you believe that prayer affects anything?
I do.
Okay. So Tell me if you had a friend in the hospital and they were given a really bad diagnosis, right?
Mhm.
Like terminal cancer, you have 2 weeks to live, or brain dead. They were in a car accident and they're brain dead, and they are told that they'll never come back.
Mhm.
Do you pray for them?
I do.
What do you pray?
I pray that God heals them.
That you'll heal them. And so like a miracle almost, right? That like, even if the doctor said like brain is dead, no,
Yep.
because you believe you can.
Mhm.
What do you do if your friend's, if your friend's grandmother dies, or if your friend's spouse dies? What do you pray for then?
For the family.
Healing for the family. Why don't you pray that the dead person will come back? Like, if you really believed that God was
You're pretty much saying that, okay, if I believe that I could pray for this miracle,
Mhm.
he should be able to raise that person from the dead.
For instance, my dog that just died, my 17 and a half year old dog, the last few days she was in the hospital, and we thought that if this went well, we'd have about 6 more months with her. And my mom prayed from a good place. She told me, I'm praying that Bronte will get those last 6 months. And I said, why don't you pray she'll turn 2? Why don't you pray she'll go back in time and be a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old and I can start all over? If you really, truly believed, because if I had a genie bottle and I got 3 wishes, one of mine would be that my mother-in-law would come back because she died and my husband misses her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why do we limit God more than we limit a genie in a movie, right? So why do you say, and I think that deep down it shows that everyone that thinks they really believe, there's a little nugget of doubt, because if not, why do we still pray for a complete miracle? If someone says, oh, brain dead, the brain is a mess, like it's never ever coming back. But in history, there are times that that's wrong, right? So there's a slight chance. So we might pray for a miracle from God. But when we know we can't pray to open up that grave, they come back 20 years younger or 50 years younger, we don't pray for it because we all know deep down that it's not possible. And if God was completely omnipotent, why isn't it possible? You would also have a will for the person you're praying for in the coma with. So why wouldn't you say, God, if it's your decision, bring my grandma back 50 years younger? It's an interesting point, right?
Yeah, I get your side as well.
Yeah, it's just an interesting, subtle way that I feel like I don't know. I kind of think like, do people really believe quite as much as they think they do?
This has been very interesting and fun.
Good.
Thank you so much again.
Thank you. It was nice meeting you.